Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. Let me slowly start introducing us and the speakers while some attendees are still joining. Feel free to actually put in the chat where you're from, where you're located. Say hi. It would be great to know where you're all from. So I'm Natalia. I'm a Principal Product Marketing Manager at Code Intelligence, and I'm going to be your host and moderator today. And our topic is securing medical devices, why fuzzing is a must. And after this session, you're going to be a pro in fuzz testing and in compliance topics as well. This session is recorded, and we're going to share the recording with all of you afterwards. Just check your inboxes tomorrow, starting tomorrow. Please feel free to put any of your questions in the Q&A section below, and do not use chat for that. We're not going to monitor chat for questions, so please find the button with the Q&A sign and put any questions there. You can also upvote questions so that we know with which questions we should start first. What are the most relevant questions for you? So let's kick it off with a small, quick poll. You should, in a second, you're gonna see one question so that it will help us to understand how familiar you are with fuzz testing. So please choose the most appropriate one. And while you are doing so, let me introduce our speakers. So our first speaker today is Dr. Julian Alters. He is joining us from Magdeburg in Germany. Julian holds a degree in computer science with a focus on medical image processing. He brings over a decade of expertise in this field, including 4 years as a software engineer. Since 2023, he has been with Seleon as a senior consultant focused on software lifecycle management, cybersecurity, and AI in medical devices. Welcome, Julian. And our second speaker is Dr. Niklas Henrik, who is a Chief Technical Officer at Code Intelligence. He is joining us today from Cologne in Germany. At Code Intelligence, Niklas has been spearheading the development of AI-powered security testing solutions. He holds a PhD in computer science from the University of Koblenz in Germany. And feel free to connect with our speakers on LinkedIn. I'm going to share their LinkedIn profiles in the chat right now. So nice. I see that most of you voted and participated in the poll. Let me end the poll right now and share the results with you. So if you see them, then so we see that half of our participants today never used fuzz testing. So don't worry, you're in the right place in the right moment. So right after this webinar, you're going to understand it way better and understand the main benefits of using it. And it's good to see that 23% of our participants actually already have been using it. So it's also great to learn more about your experience and compare it with the approach that we're going to talk about today. So let me stop sharing the poll. Thank you again for participating in it. And with that, Julian, the stage is yours. Let's kick it off.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you very much. Also, very welcome from my side to our webinar, Securing Medical Devices and Why Fuzzing is a Must. So as Natalia already mentioned, I'm affiliated with Seleon, mainly focusing on the regulatory part for software development frameworks and also cybersecurity. And this will also be the first part of our webinar today. So in the next 20 minutes, I would like to give you an overview about why do we do cybersecurity, why we have to do it, and why it is actually requested by law that we follow cybersecurity, especially for medical devices. Because in my daily life, I many times notice that the terms and terminology is not quite clear for when we're talking about cybersecurity. So I would like to start a little bit with this to get everybody on the same page when we talk about cybersecurity in this webinar. So first of all, there is a difference between safety and security. safety, like we know it from the past years, as well as from safety risk management, it is protection of the humans from the medical device. So we do not want to harm our patients. We do not want to harm our users or our user environment. In security, we're talking about protection of the medical device against other malicious attacks. So it's not directly related to the patient harm, but indirectly. And when we talk about cybersecurity, we talk about the so-called CIA triad. So we talk about confidentiality. We want to protect our data, especially sensitive data like patient information or raw medical image data, but also everything which is related to our code base, for example, our intellectual property and other configurations. We want to secure the integrity of our product or of our data or of our updates because incorrect data leads to incorrect treatments and incorrect decisions of our users. And we want to protect the availability. Availability means we want to make sure that our medical devices are not part of a denial of services here, for example, so that they work all the time, that they do not fail to work, because this can also endanger patients. In order to assess cybersecurity, when we talk about cybersecurity breaches, or you have hear news about cybersecurity breaches, you many times hear about a threat. So a threat is a potential circumstance or an event that could affect the CIA triad, so the confidentiality, availability, and integrity of information, potentially harming the owner or user of information. And a threat can not only be an intentional act from some kind of hacker, it can also be an act of nature, a human error, or a technical failure. A threat usually aims at a so-called vulnerability. So a vulnerability is any kind of security relevant flaw in either our whole IT system, our product, or an institution, which may be exploited by a threat. And when we talk about an exploit, we talk about a method or code or piece of code that uses a vulnerability, not just in software, but also in hardware. This is very important to execute unintended commands or functions. So even if you have, for example, open USB ports, they may be exploited. And what we want to do is we want to protect our assets. And we can differentiate our assets into two categories. The primary assets is everything which has a direct value to someone, not just you. So just because you as a person or as a developer think that something does not have a value, it might have a value to someone else. So this can, for example, be people, structures, facilities, anything regarding information about your product or your business, anything record related, so audit traits inside your system, your whole IT systems, resources, materials like configuration files and so on. Even your processes, relationships, or the reputation and image of your business. And this is very important because in cybersecurity risk assessment, the image of your business, your intellectual property, anything which costs your business money is explicitly included in this risk management and not like excluded like in the safety risk management. The second part are secondary assets. Secondary assets do not have a direct value for something, for someone, but they serve as a so-called threat entry point inside your system. So you want to secure your communication interfaces, or your physical ports, for example, because they can be an access point for attackers. And one additional thing here is many software developers like to leave some kind of backdoors or open ports in their systems because of easier debugging access if necessary. These are also secondary assets you need to secure if they are necessary inside your system. Okay, so this will be like a very short basics and terminology overview when we talk about cybersecurity. But why do we do cybersecurity? So there are regulatory requirements for security. In the EU, we have the medical device regulation, as hopefully everybody who's here already knows. And in the MDCG 2019-16, there is a nice overview because what we want to do is we want to fulfill the so-called GSPRs, the general safety and performance requirements. And the Annex 1 in the MDR also covers specific parts for cybersecurity. So we are obligated to have IT security, we are obligated to have operational security, and as well information security, which is directly linked to the safety and efficiency, because it aims to minimize risks, to ensure that the intended performance, and to ensure a high level of health protection in all operating modes, as well as for everything regarding intended or reasonably foreseeable risk. And as per definition, an exploit of a vulnerability is always considered a reasonably foreseeable risk, not an unreasonable. So I don't want to go into detail about this table here, just that you know. So there is a table in this MDCG guidance where every topic is covered, and you can map everything to the MDR Annex 1 and IVDR Annex 1 requirements, for example, for unauthorized access, for interoperability, or how to deal with lay persons. In order to fulfill these GSPRs, the standard IEC 8101-5-1 is currently the state of the art in the EU and is also requested by the notified bodies. So this standard defines requirements for a secure product lifecycle, not just focusing on development, but also focusing on the manufacturing process. So you need to have a secure manufacturing workflow. You need to consider security during deployment, installation, maintenance, and also decommissioning. So if you have sensitive data on your device and you just throw it on the electronic garbage, there is still a threat because someone can pick it up and reverse engineer it at home. So you need to have some kind, for example, factory reset for your decommissioned products. And everything in this standard has a focus on security requirements, vulnerabilities, and threat mitigation. We now look to the other big market, the US. Since a few years, the Section 524B of the US FD&C Act is in place, which covers cybersecurity for medical devices and cyber devices. And if you have a look on the definition of cyber devices in the FDA, you will notice that basically everything which has some kind of programmable logic inside is considered a cyber device and falls under this law of the FD&C Act. And in order to fulfill these cybersecurity requirements, the FDA provides guidances. The first one is the Cybersecurity and Medical Device Guidance for pre-market submissions. This guidance requests a so-called secure product development framework, and it also recognizes the IEC 8101-5-1 as one way to fulfill this requirement of a so-called security product development framework. In addition, this guidance defines a lot of development activities for new submissions when you submit a product to the US market. The second guidance I want to mention is the post-market management of cybersecurity medical devices. This guidance, as the title suggests, covers a lot of PMS activities, has a lot of requests or requirements, recommendations for a cybersecurity risk management process. And this guidance is actually applicable for every marketed and legally distributed device, so everything which is already in the market. And the third one, to cover all of the guidances is related to cybersecurity, is not really a guidance, but more like a Q&A. So if you are developing devices which are networked, so need to be integrated into a bigger medical system, working with a lot of other medical devices together and containing off-the-shelf software, you might have a look at this guidance as well, because there are a lot of good Q&As there where you can get a little bit of insight how to deal with certain problems. Okay, so this was a little bit from the regulatory part. So we have many regulations for many different countries, but what they all have in common is that you need to have a proper testing and vulnerability scanning. So what at least the EU and USA market have in common is that you need 4 different kinds of testing throughout your product lifecycle. The first of all is the so-called security requirements testing. So first of all, you need to define requirements specific to cybersecurity. Of course, because you have requirements defined, you also need to verify them when you have implemented them so that they work as intended. This can be done, for example, through unit testing or through manual testing, but this can also be part of higher level tests like integration tests or whole system tests. You need to check for conflicts between cybersecurity and other system or stakeholder requirements, because cybersecurity requirements have the ability that they, more like other requirements, may contradict other requirements, like stakeholder requirements or requirements from the safety risk management. So you need to assess them and make sure that you have a good reasoning why you follow one requirement more than the other. And if derived from risk controls, you need to ensure, obviously, that your new risk mitigation measures or requirements do not contradict each other, that they do not introduce new vulnerabilities, and you have to ensure that there's no safety risks for patient users or environment. The second one is the so-called threat mitigation testing. So threat mitigation testing checks whether implemented measures not only work, but truly mitigate the threats. And this can be done in various ways. So first of all, of course, if you have a proper security testing in place, like a continuous testing or a fuzz testing, this will be quite easy to check if vulnerabilities have been closed. You can have other parts of vulnerability testing in place, like a static code analysis, or if you use automatic tools like SonarQube, those also help. The third thing is how you can deal with this problem is to have penetration tests, or in this case, repeated penetration tests. So if your first penetration test has findings, then you can try to close them, and then you can hire the same company again to make a second penetration test and see if they can now access your system or if your requirement was good enough. The third part is the so-called vulnerability testing. So vulnerability testing is basically covering a very wide range of activities. And at a minimum, you as a manufacturer have to or has to create a so-called SBOM. An SBOM is a software bill of materials. So you collect every third-party library which you used inside your system, open source libraries, but also self-developed libraries. And you need to perform a so-called CVE assessment. So CVE stands for Common Vulnerabilities and Exposures. And those are every vulnerabilities which are publicly known. So there are public databases like the ENISA or CISA database or the NVD, the National Vulnerability Database, where you can search for all the libraries, open source libraries, including the version number, and it gives you a list of every vulnerability which is publicly known, as well as a description what this vulnerability is doing, what this vulnerability is capable of, as well as a so-called CVSS score. So a scoring system from 0 to 10, how critical this vulnerability is. So for every product, you actually need to create an SBOM, you need to perform the CVE scan, and you need to perform the risk assessment for all CVEs. So you need to check if a vulnerability, which is publicly known, is actually applicable to you or your product. So a proper way would be to have a continuous vulnerability testing, because as we all know, cybersecurity is a very developing field and it's rapidly evolving. So if you perform a vulnerability scan once each month, I can assure you that you have identified every month like 2 or 3 new vulnerabilities which have been found or arise during this time. So a continuous vulnerability testing is requested by most of the regulatory frameworks. And continuously means on a daily basis, actually. So I know this is not always possible. It depends highly on the resources and the capacities you have in your team or in your company. But there are automatic tools to help you with this, which can also, for example, be included in your CI/CD pipeline, so that in the best case, you don't even need to worry about the vulnerability testing, because it's conducted in parallel during your daily work. The third point is not for development, but for post-market surveillance. If you have devices inside the market, you should also try to come up or at least think about an automated way, please, for monitoring the field devices, because you want to make sure that you capture all the cybersecurity signals or as much as possible so that you can prevent cybersecurity breaches from happening before they happen. The last one is the so-called penetration test. The penetration testing reveals threats and vulnerabilities in the complete system. So it is comparable to, for example, a system test or the summative usability evaluation. So it's on the validation level of your system. In the penetration test, you want to find as less as possible vulnerabilities, and you want to prevent any critical vulnerability to be found, because everything you find in the penetration test costs a lot of money. Because the penetration test should be conducted on the final version of your product. If you find mistakes there, need to conduct or define new requirements, you need to reopen your software development lifecycle again, you need to update all your documentation, requirements engineering, and so on. So it costs a lot of money and time. The penetration test requires a maximum independence of testers. So usually you hire an external company. If you are a really, really big company and have a separate department inside your company, this is also fine. But the penetration test must not be conducted by the people who develop the system. And notified bodies also request an official penetration test report. So this is from my experience, the first thing a notified body requests when they check cybersecurity. Do you have a pen test? Where's the report? And how did you deal with any finding inside this report? That's why the identified risks also must be assessed through the risk management process or the security risk management process. And now let's come back to our actual topic. So securing your medical device, why fuzzing is a must. Like I already explained a little bit, errors and mistakes are costly. And as everybody knows, especially from the software development point of view, or software developers know this very well, is the earlier you find bugs inside your code, the easier and the cheaper it is to actually debug them and resolve them. And a penetration test may cost over 10,000 euros, depending on the size of the system and the depth of the penetration test. So from my experience, penetration tests cost, for example, 6,000 euros. That was but one penetration tester for one day on a very small system, up to like 55,000 euros, where two penetration testers came to one of our clients for 2 weeks, and they performed in-depth penetration tests on, I would not say a big system, it was more like a medium-sized or a small medium-sized system, so not even really big, so it can be very costly. And findings may cause another implementation cycle. So the early areas are found, the cheaper. So it is very advisable, like with functional testing as well, to have testing during development, to have a vulnerability or continuous vulnerability scanning on your code base to find these vulnerabilities as early as possible. And because this is very troublesome, like everybody probably knows, if you try to set 8 different software developers onto this task who do nothing else than do fuzzing or static code analysis or code reviews 24/7 every day, they get really frustrated, they get really annoyed, and it is extremely hard to find people or experts who are willing to do this. So, but luckily there are many solutions for these tools, and one of these solutions will be presented to you by Niklas now in the second part of our webinar. So I would like to hand over to Niklas for less talk and more action.
Thank you so much, Julian, for such an informative talk and guiding us all through the security requirements. I have a minor question from my side. Could you clarify what is the difference between security requirements testing and threat mitigation testing?
Yeah, sure. So security requirements testing checks if you have implemented your requirement from the correctly from the technical point of view. And the threat mitigation testing checks if you actually reduce the risk. So let me give you an example. You have a Bluetooth connection, and one of your requirements is, hey, this Bluetooth connection has to be encrypted because we do not want anyone to sniff information in plain text. So your software developer sees this requirement, he defines what he or she wants to do, they implement an encryption, and functionally it is working. So there is no plain text readable anymore, the Bluetooth connection is encrypted. But now your penetration tester comes and tells you, okay, yes, you have an encrypted Bluetooth connection, but you used a 7-year-old algorithm, which is highly outdated. And any open source library or tool I can find on the internet is able to crack your connection. So you have a past cybersecurity requirements test because functionally it's working, but it does not reduce your threat at all because anybody with a little bit of technical expertise is able to use these open source tools to actually crack your encryption.
Yeah, thank you so much, Julian. Thank you for the talk one more time. Dear participants, please put your questions to the Q&A section. Julian will gonna check it out right now while Nicholas is gonna present his part. And some of your questions we're gonna cover after Nicholas's presentation. Nicholas, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Natalia. All right, let's get our hands dirty and see how we can use fuzzing in action. Before we do that, let me quickly show you where you can place fuzz testing and all the other methods that Julian has mentioned in the software development lifecycle. So, as Julian has mentioned, the CVE scanning, the static analysis tools currently are used or most likely are used in the build phase. They scan the code for known issues. Yeah, they can only detect what is already known about vulnerable libraries. Then we have the pen test, as Julian mentioned, a very effective but also very, very costly method to find vulnerabilities in your product. And now, to close this gap in between, we have fuzz testing, especially white box fuzz testing. The good thing about white box fuzz testing is that it scans the code in execution and with random most effective inputs and can uncover hidden vulnerabilities that cannot be detected by static analysis, and that prevents those vulnerabilities from being found in pen tests and then have costly reiterations about the in the software development lifecycle. So there are basically two approaches to fuzz testing. So one is black box fuzz testing. This might also be known to you as protocol fuzzing. So we use those terms interchangeably. And then we have white box fuzz testing or coverage guided fuzz testing. Let me first start with black box fuzz testing and explain the basic idea of what it does. So you can think of black box fuzzing as basically a fuzzer sending random inputs to your system and hopefully getting the correct random inputs, so to say, in order to crash your system. So by this way, you can protect yourself from vulnerabilities that you did not know about before. But as you can see here also depicted by the image, this approach might be not the most effective one. But I will highlight the benefits of white box fuzz testing later on. But the basic idea is still the same. You have your inputs, random inputs, which are sent to your system and trying to crash your system. What are the downsides of black box fuzzing or black box fuzz testing? As the name implies, the system is treated as a black box. So there is no knowledge about the system under test, meaning that it just shoots random inputs to your system in the hope that one of those random inputs triggers a vulnerable code line and uncovers a vulnerability. But the downside is that it may not reach many internal code paths because it does not know about the complex logic of your system. So it may yield low code coverage. Furthermore, it may be quite inefficient for complex inputs formats. So if your system can only be addressed via, let's say, special protocols, it first has to be effectively told or programmed a special protocol fuzzer for this, that it can generate those test cases for highly structured inputs. This can also be challenging without understanding the true structure of your system. Furthermore, if black box fuzz testing finds a vulnerability, it may be very difficult to debug the issue because all you know is the input which was sent to your system, and then the developers have to first understand what's the path of this input through the system. So what does it do? What does it trigger? So without internal knowledge, pinpointing the root cause of a crash can be harder with black box fuzz testing. And therefore, white box fuzz testing to the rescue. So what's the fundamental difference? So the fundamental difference is that it, as the name implies, does not treat the system as a black box. So it knows about the system under tests via a technique called instrumentation. And this instrumentation can feed feedback back to the fuzzer, meaning that as opposed to the picture we have seen in the first place where this monkey just hammers on the keyboard, we are still sending random input to the system, but this is a smartly mutated input, meaning that the fuzzer knows about the structure of the system and then directs the inputs into certain parts and areas of the system, and it constantly gets feedback if it has reached those parts of the system. One downside of this is that you have to create so-called fuzz test harnesses, but don't be afraid, those fuzz test harnesses are very, very similar to unit tests, so something that your developers are already very, very familiar with. So a unit test is that most likely the developers write on a daily basis. So you can also in your mental model think of a fuzz test as a unit test, but instead of having a fixed set of inputs, you send cleverly chosen random data to the system. This approach has some advantages. First and foremost, you can reach a high code coverage because as the fuzzer knows the system, it's more likely to explore a wider range of the system's logic. Furthermore, it can find deeper and more complex vulnerabilities because it can direct the input to each and every code line in your system. And furthermore, I think for me as a developer, that's the best part. It aids in root cause analysis because with white box fuzz testing, you not only get the crashing input, but you also get the exact location in your system where the crash happens. So you can just jump to the location you know exactly in the code. Okay, this is in line 105 and the input was this. And then you can directly set a breakpoint, feed the input to the system and directly understand what's going on in your system. We also have a quote here from one of our clients. So they also wanted to employ fuzz testing and they pitted black box fuzz testing against white box fuzz testing. And they also confirmed that with the help of white box fuzz testing, they were actually able to achieve a better and more testable code and find the vulnerabilities which are hidden in the code, which they were not able to achieve with black box fuzz testing. All right, so you may ask yourself, why isn't everyone using it? So if it's so great, why isn't everyone using it? So I've presented many slides to show you, okay, fuzz testing, white box fuzz testing is a thing that you should do, but why isn't everyone using it? And the truth is that it can be a lot of effort. And the good thing is in this talk, I will also show how this effort can, with the help of AI, be completely automated. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's first have a look into what the effort actually is. In order to create those fuzz tests or those fuzz harnesses, you need to understand your code base and select the right targets, the right functions or entry points in your system to actually create a fuzz test for. So this means that you need to be that you need to know your source code base, that you need to be a domain expert in it. If not, it may take even longer to find the right targets in your code base. Then, of course, you have to create the fuzz tests. For this, you also need some expertise in creating those fuzz tests. Next thing is that you then, if you created the fuzz test, you need to run and optimize the fuzz test. So you need to understand, okay, the fuzz test I've written, is this a good fuzz test? Can there something be optimized? And then, of course, the fuzzing takes place. This is fully automated by the fuzzing engines. And then later on, you need to understand how to merge the coverage. So how to understand which parts of the codes have been reached by the fuzzer and how to make sense of the findings. So we estimated from our experience that, for example, with 100,000 lines of code, you may need up to 1,000 hours of manual effort to actually do white box fuzz testing. But with the help of code intelligence, we can bring the power of this advanced security testing into reach for all without spending those 1,000 hours. So here we have this cycle, so entry point selection, test creation, all the things I have shown before. And all of this is now completely automated by our AI test agent and can be solved with just a single command. So you do not need to painstakingly do all the manual steps yourself. You can just fire up this command and all of this fuzz test creation will be done automatically. So then let's have a look. How does this look in practice? So I'm going to share now my integrated development environment. So what are you seeing here? Let me first describe you the lay of the land. So what you're seeing here is an integrated development environment. This is the tool your developers use in order to write software and create your product. I've chosen Visual Studio Code just as an example. Integrated development environment. Our solution works with every integrated development environment. So regardless of the tools your developers use, our tool is compatible with these integrated development environments. On the left-hand side, you see the source code. This may be the source code of your product. In this case, it's an open source library we have downloaded from the internet, from some open source libraries. Specifically, it's a so-called YAML library. What is YAML? YAML is a specific file format similar to JSON, and some of the configuration, or sometimes it's used to configure a software product. So it might very well be that your product can be configured with the help of a YAML file. And of course, you need to make sure that these YAML files are not an attack vector in your system, and therefore we have chosen this as an example to showcase our product. So to summarize here, we have this integrated development environment. On the left-hand side, we have the source code, which may be very well your product. And now we are going to start our AI test agent. So on the right-hand side, the AI test agent is installed in this integrated development environment as a console application, and we now can start the AI test agent. And while it is working, I will explain in detail what's going on. So we are now instructing the AI test agent to create fuzz tests, so and then to stop when it has reached 75% code coverage. So when 75% of your product are covered with fuzz tests or are bombarded with random inputs, we want to stop. So what is happening now? So first, it's statically analyzing your source code. This was the first step, what you need to do. So you need to understand your source code base. This is what you now do not need to do yourself. Maybe that the knowledge is lost or that the persons in the company are no longer there. So our AI test agent can understand your source code base and then identify the most likely attack vectors in your system. So the most likely functions or entry points into your system that may yield into an attack vector. And therefore it's picking each one of those entry points and in the background already running and generating the fuzz test. So we can follow along here live on the left-hand side. So all green lines here in the IDE are now covered with fuzz testing. So all the green lines here are bombarded already with random input, and the red lines are yet to be covered. So our system has already finished. It was quite fast. So what happened? So it has identified 4 functions in the system for which it has generated those fuzz test harnesses, which then are used to bombard the system with random input. In total, we have reached more than 75%. So it was 77%. So this is very good. So this means that we stopped after reaching 75%. And as I said before, you can now see directly which parts of the system have been covered. In total, around 2,500 unique test cases, so unique random inputs were generated. So it generated many more than that, most likely in the realm of 100,000 inputs, but 2,510 were unique and reached a new path in your system and helped increasing the code coverage. Furthermore, we have also hidden a security vulnerability in this code. So I don't know much about the source code base, even though I use it in demos, but I just put one security vulnerability into the system. As you can see, even if you're not a programmer, well, that doesn't sound good. So we have hidden a segmentation fault here in the system. And there's a quite complicated condition, so business logic, which has to be met in order to trigger this vulnerability. But the fuzzer is able to efficiently generate and mutate its random input to cover this line to reach this condition and also therefore trigger the security vulnerability in the next line. So this is great, as I said, opposed to black box fuzz testing. Here, the programmer already knows, this is the offending line. Here, the crash happened, and then can fully understand what has happened beforehand. For the more technically inclined people in the audience, I'm just going to do a quick deep dive now, only very short, how those fuzz tests actually look like, so that also the developers in the audience can satisfy their curiosity. So basically, for a developer, this might look very familiar. So instead of having here unit test, it now says fuzz test. And this is the fuzz test that has been fully automatically generated with our AI test agent. So all those lines here were fully automatically generated. We are even instructed the AI to add some comments to it, such that now this fuzz test here serves as an entry point for the fuzzer, and it directs its random inputs into this fuzz test, which then in turn feeds this to the system. We propose to check those fuzz tests into your source code, same as you do with unit tests. And you can then execute them continuously with every code change in your CI/CD pipeline and try to uncover vulnerabilities which may have sneaked into your system. So this is what the AI test agent in the end generated. It also executed it, but you can then check those into your source code repository, and as I said, execute them continuously in your CI/CD pipeline. So this is basically, I hope I could show you the power of fuzz testing and how easy it is nowadays with the help of AI and our tool product, who basically provides an end-to-end life cycle for the fuzz testing process. So perhaps we can do a quick recap. So basically it exceeded the specified code coverage. So we have reached 75%. For this, we created 4 fuzz tests, and more than 2,500 unique test cases were generated. And we uncovered one, in this case, the only existing bug. And for code coverage, this is very important, this code coverage part, because in our experience with our customers, the FDA also sometimes wants to see code coverage for specific parts of your system. So then you can just use this code coverage report, send this along to the FDA and say, okay, here, these are the most critical functions, and we can verify now that we have thoroughly tested those parts of the system. So code coverage is an essential tool basically to demonstrate or to prove what you did. Now this is a webinar dedicated to medical use cases, but this technique, of course, fuzz testing can be applied to many more things also outside of the medical device industry. So we also, of course, continuously improve our product and also take up the challenge and try to find vulnerabilities in software that is out there and is also quite popular. For example, Wolf SSL. This is a library which is used in, I think it's a world market leader in secure connections for embedded devices. So whenever you see this HTTPS symbol, so for embedded devices, Wolf SSL is one of the main libraries used there. Even though Wolf SSL is already fuzzed by hand, our AI test agent was still able to find new vulnerabilities and continuously finds new things in this library. Also in Amazon AWS, so the cloud service of Amazon, they also have some open source libraries, which we also, of course, directed our AI test agent to look at, and therefore we are also finding issues there, which are then, of course, fixed by Amazon very fast. So this shall just demonstrate our technology is not only suited for medical devices, but of course works very well with software written for medical devices. So what does our solution provide? So basically it helps across all stages. So it's an end-to-end solution for fuzz testing. Basically, we help with the setup and the integration into the development lifecycle, integration in your CI/CD pipeline. We help with fully automatically creating those fuzz tests that before we solved this problem needed to be created by hand without the domain knowledge. So you can just direct it to an unknown code base. We help with assessing the findings that the AI test agent found. And of course, most important, with an easy to use debugging workflow that you can set breakpoints directly in your IDE, let the system feed the crashing input to your system, and then for the developer to quickly understand what was the root cause and fix it immediately before it's too late. So next steps for you. Best is try it out yourself. So you can start using the AI test agent on your code. You can get a free license of CI Fuzz. So we have a free trial. You can try it out, install it, and see how it works. One thing that you also need to provide is that you need to ensure that you have access to an LLM. And this is a good thing. So the good thing is we don't provide you with an LLM. You can use your own LLM. So this is very important also for us, also for data integrity. So we don't provide an LLM because most likely you're already working with a cloud provider like Microsoft Azure, AWS, so Amazon AWS, Google GCP, or others. And you can just use the LLM that is already provided by your cloud provider. This has the benefit that you already have an agreement, a contract about data confidentiality with your cloud provider. So no data will be exchanged with our tool, so it's installed completely local on your machine, so you do not need to worry at all about this. The only communication is with your LLM that you provide and fully control. And if you want to know more, of course, always talk to your team. And then I'm handing back to Natalia and looking forward to your questions. Thank you.
Awesome, Nicholas. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the presentation and the detailed demo. Now we can turn to our Q&A section, and I see that many questions were actually answered by Julian. Thank you, Julian, for the hard work you did. So let's then talk a bit more about fuzz testing and the differences between white box, gray box, and black box. So there's a question. Can the protocol fuzz testing with a lot of information from the system like DBC, messages, power consumption, RAM monitoring be considered gray box?
Well, for gray box in the literature, there are sometimes two terms used. We think of it, so what the approach that we present is white box fuzz testing on the literature. It's also sometimes called gray box fuzz testing because we use a coverage guided approach, meaning that we use the instrument, the source code, as a guidance for the fuzzer. If you supply these things to a black box fuzzer, if it's then gray box, yes, I guess so. Might be, but it's still the downside of this is that it still does not know anything about the internals, the actual source code of your system. So it may know something about the system overall, but not the source code itself. So this power you only get with coverage guided fuzz testing. So white box fuzz testing. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Still one more question for Nicholas. For medical devices, much of the firmware is written in assembly. How well does CFR support this? How does it identify security vulnerabilities such as out-of-bounds access in memory?
So the firmware in assembly, so we instrument C and C++ code. During the compiler phase, I have to admit, I'm not quite sure if we could also instrument assembly code directly. I have to admit, I have to ask our chief scientist. I've never done this before. So we currently rely on C and C++ as the language of choice. And if C and C++ is there, we instrument the code while it's being compiled, and then you can, then benefit from fuzzing there. Yeah.
Yeah, Julian, there is one more question for you. Low-risk devices have fewer regulatory requirements. Can we also reduce the effort for cybersecurity for low-risk devices?
No. So at least not with this explanation. So during the software development, according to IEC 62304, there's this software safety classification A, B, and C, with A being a very low-risk device and C being a very high-risk software. And this is directly connected to the amount of documentation we need to provide to the notified bodies and we need to do from a regulatory point of view. Unfortunately, at least for the 8101-5-1 for product security, it is explicitly stated in the standard that you are not allowed to use the software safety classification for reducing the amount of cybersecurity. Nonetheless, there is also the statement that you may skip any activity from the standard if you have a proper justification, which is not the software safety class. And it is written that this justification has to be provided by someone with the appropriate cybersecurity expertise. So basically, it is not allowed from the standards point of view that your CEO or regulatory affairs manager decides that you are not doing cybersecurity activities if they cannot show that they have the proper expertise in this technical field.
Thank you. One more question regarding protocols. What are the most protocol you encounter while testing medical devices? BLE, ZigBee, etc.
Yeah.
Who would like to answer this?
Yeah, Julian, I can take it if you.
I mean, I can answer it from my experience from what our clients use. So the most of the interfaces we deal with or I deal with when I help clients and customers with documentation are mainly Wi-Fi connections, so TCP/IP connections or Bluetooth Lite. This is from my experience the majority what other manufacturers use.
Great.
Natalia, may I answer the other two questions, because I think they are basically, you can combine them, I think, a little bit in one question. So regarding what kind of fuzzing do you have in mind, or are you running the application and the tool and host target platform? So perhaps, so what we do and what white box fuzz testing need is a software in the loop testing approach, meaning that the software you have also needs to be executable not only on the embedded device, but also in software on another device. So basically, where you run your unit tests, this is also the place where the fuzz tests are executed. So basically, with the software and the loop approach, so similar to what you do with your unit test, this is also where the fuzz tests are executed. So I hope that this also answers both of those questions. So basically, it's not done on the embedded device, but on a host platform or on a normal PC and things like this. Yeah. Perfect.
Great. Thank you so much. We have two more open questions. If you have any further questions, please add them to the Q&A section. And to just give you a bit more time for that, I will also launch a quick poll. This is going to be the second and the last one for today. So please let us know if you'd like to get an individual call and discuss how you could apply fuzz testing like CI-fuzz into securing medical devices. And while you're answering, let's just cover the last two questions. Do you need to fuzz all units, or do you need to stop some functions?
Yeah, so I think this is basically two questions in one. Perhaps the first part, if you need to fuzz the complete system, well, this unfortunately depends. It depends on what your requirements are, or what you want to prove to the FDA. What we have seen is that you sometimes also can concentrate on a critical part of your system, and you say, okay, this part is very critical, and then you can say, then you can prove basically that 100% coverage of those critical functions are achieved. So this is what we have also seen with some clients, that not all functions need to be fuzzed, but the most critical one within also sometimes make up of 50, 60% of the system, or something like this. So I think the other question is, do you need to stop some functions? Well, it's basically, as you said, fuzz testing is similar to a unit test. The software needs to be executed in a software in the loop manner. Sometimes for this, you need to stop some certain functionality, perhaps communication to external systems, or you do not need to stop them, and then the fuzzer will also check those.
Great. I think we should continue with you, Nicholas. So can the tool identify fuzzing anti-patterns like global state external dependencies, like IO access?
Yeah, so it's not a static analysis tool. So the good thing is it does not look for anti-patterns, but it directly tests your code for vulnerabilities. So, I think it goes a little bit beyond checking for anti-patterns, because sometimes it's not a style guide, I would say. So you may use anti-patterns in your code, but if it doesn't lead to security vulnerabilities or exploit or crashes, our tool won't detect it. So our tool tries to reduce the noise and only finds so-called real vulnerabilities, so things that actually crash or harm your system. So it's not like a static analysis, which sometimes more like a style guide. So you could do this, or this seems like an anti-pattern, but with sometimes no real consequences. We only focus on the real issues, so where something actually crashes. Yeah.
And one more great question. Can the source code fuzz also find vulnerabilities that SCA can find, like heartbleed bug?
Yeah, the good thing is that actually a software component analysis can only tell you that you use a library that has the heartbleed bug in it. But if you think about this, well, how does the SCA software component analysis know that there's a vulnerability in it? Well, there's a vulnerability library where it checks, but how are these vulnerability libraries filled? And this is actually where fuzz testing can play a huge role, because those vulnerabilities are found by hackers, pen testers, or with the help of fuzzing. So this is really crucial. So fuzzing, our technique, is not something that reports about known vulnerabilities, like saying, okay, we know there's the heartbleed vulnerability in this library. We actually find those vulnerabilities. So this is an important difference between tools which only scan for known vulnerabilities. Our tool uncovers vulnerabilities which are not known before. And I think this is a great benefit of fuzz testing. This is also what Google uses, for example, in OSS fuzz, where they continuously scan with fuzzing open source libraries. Yeah.
And the last question for today, can we have one failure scenario while doing fuzz testing?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure if I fully understand the question. Let me perhaps have one failure scenario. Yeah, sorry, I think I might need to skip this one. I'm not fully, but I can answer the other one. Is it possible to add our payload to the fuzzer? Yes, so the fuzzer learns the protocol and understands or learns how your system behaves, how the API contract works, but you can also seed it with some input that you already know shall be tested. So you can give a seed or a dictionary, it's called, and say, okay, fuzzer, start with this random input and then go from there and try to mutate it, change it, that it actually crashes the system. Yeah.
Great. And with that, we are finishing our webinar for today. Thank you, Nicholas. Thank you, Julian, for sharing your expertise with our participants today. And thanks to all participants today for your time, for visiting us, and for your questions. Have a great day. Have a great evening, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.